I don't know if you guys can see me or not. Ryan, can you let me know if you see me? Okay. So the hearing is just about to get started, and I wanted to let everybody know just to hang tight as everything gets underway there in Texas. This is a huge, huge day for freedom of speech and all the people who are risking their careers or have already risked their careers by speaking out, by being whistleblowers, people like Zach Vorhies, who will be testifying today. So I just wanted to say hello to everybody and just hope that you get everything you can out of this stream and make sure you share it with everybody so that the truth can get out there. Because in the end, it is the truth that will set us free. So I'm not in the studio currently, as you can tell. I am monitoring the stream remotely, and we will not have a live N3 prime time tonight, as we are instead producing this stream for you guys today. So I just want to say I love y'all, and I just want everyone to say a prayer for Zach, for Next News Network, for all the whistleblowers out there putting their lives on the line. Oh my goodness, these people don't even know how to drive. What an idiot. They're going to kill me. Hyundai Palisade. Yeah, when you drive a car like this, people drive like idiots. Anyway, if you know, you know. I love you guys. Let's make history.
Morning. Senate Committee on State Affairs will come to order. Will the clerk call the roll?
Betancourt. Birdwell.
Present.
LaMantia.
Present.
Menendez. Middleton.
Here.
Parker. Perry. Schwartner.
Present.
Zaffarini.
Present.
Paxton.
Present.
Hughes.
Here. Quorum is present. Welcome, everyone. We would normally conduct meetings of the Committee on State Affairs in the Senate chamber. That's where we customarily do it. As you know, there's construction going on or maintenance going on, so that room is unavailable to us, and so we're glad to be cozy in here. Thank you for folks who are standing, and feel free to make yourselves at home and come in and out. I don't think there's a whole lot going on today. There should be seats outside, but you're welcome. Please stay as long as you need to and want to. We have a big agenda today, a couple of matters I want to address, important matters. A couple of things. I've been reminded that this is the first, I believe the first committee hearing that Senator Zaffarini has attended since she has become the dean of the Texas Senate. What an honor for us to be with you on this occasion. Thank you again for being here. And also, through research, all appropriate research, we were able to schedule this hearing on the day of Senator Schwartner's birthday. So happy birthday, Senator. Thanks for sharing your birthday with us. Thank you for being here. And so we'll see if still have a couple members en route with obviously traveling and weather delays in many places. And I know that's affected many here and also many of our witnesses who some will not be able to make it for that reason. As we begin, I'm going to see if any member of the committee wishes to make any opening remarks or anything like that. If anybody has anything, I'll start down here just if you want to. Senator LaMantia, you don't have to. Just want to see, we'll just work our way around. Anything, Senator Bardwell? Wow, okay. Please, Madam Vice Chair.
Well, I am glad to be part of this. I mean, so many constituents have reached out about the issues we're going to be addressing today, but I especially wanted to just express appreciation to my policy director, Laura Carr, who is staffing her last committee meeting, State Affairs hearing with us today. She is getting married, and we wish her the best, and I just appreciate her work. And also my new Chief of Staff, Laura Stowe, is with us today, so I just wanted to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thank you very has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? Dean's, we like that too. We like
Keep
that.
asking her things.
The committee's accustomed to working together on these matters, and I want to make sure that everyone knows about some changes we've had. Katrina Corkle, our longtime deputy director and director of the Jurisprudence Committee, is now director of State Affairs. This is our first hearing to put together from stem to stern and to run. Thank you, Katrina. And Emma Gibson, a new member of our team, is working today to keep everything going well. And so thankful to have each one of them and each member of the member staff as well. And so as we begin moving through these interim charges, this is one of three, we believe, three interim hearings that the committee will hold. And so again, thanks everyone for accommodating your schedules and getting here. On the issue of elections and election security, both big tech, and that's a broad term that is somewhat amorphous, but I think you know what we mean in general. Large entities which have a tremendous reach have a lot of influence, and this has been a subject of legislation here in a number of areas, in Texas and many states. And so taking a look at the influence of big tech and also foreign entities, I think we realize that foreign money, and by foreign in this limited context, I mean not just outside of Texas, but outside of the United States. When I say foreign, I want to clarify. Again, we're thankful for folks from all walks of life and all places. In U.S. elections, it's important that foreign money is not involved, and U.S. and Texas law are clear about that. And so on both of those issues, large internet companies have a lot of power, and the power that they have over information, what information they allow us to see, how they shape the information that they allow us to see, what they choose to withhold, what they choose to promote. It's obviously tremendous. And in an election year like this one, I guess there's never been an election year like this one, but what's underway, folks are concerned as we go into the fall election, big issues at stake. And so that's why the Lieutenant Governor has charged this committee with looking at these issues. And of course, Texas has passed some very strong election integrity reforms in the area of mail ballots, and as far as in-person voting, making sure that poll watchers are allowed to do their jobs, making sure that voters aren't being misled, making sure that they're not being bullied or forced or coerced to vote a certain way. Those are all important. Along with that, we have to make sure that the people of Texas are not being misled and not being given false and misleading information. And so this is a big deal for election integrity. And so we're going to call up our first invited witnesses. If you're here to testify, we do have some invited testimony, but everyone is welcome. So after we hear from our invited witnesses, we're going to open up the floor for testimony from everyone. And so there'll be electronic kiosks where you can check in. We may end up using paper as well if we have some technical difficulties, but everyone who wishes to will have an opportunity to testify today. This chamber belongs to the people, and that's who we work for. And so we're going to call up our first invited witnesses. We're going to call Dan Schneider. And that's the spot is, if you'll take a seat over there on my right, your left. Zach Vorhies. And Zach, any next to Dan or anywhere in those middle two, wherever you just, there you go. And then Ryan Harding. Thank you, please. You just pick the seat and move your nameplate wherever you prefer, right? It's a paper plate, but it's still got your name on it. And so welcome, each of you. I'll remind everyone our invited testimony and also our folks who testify later, when you fill out the witness affirmation electronically or on paper, you are swearing an oath. And so all the testimony today is under oath. Everybody's aware of that. We got you on there. Everybody's aware of that. And so with that, the chair calls Dan Schneider, and please go ahead and begin your testimony. Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for...
Pull that microphone over close to you as well.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for inviting me to testify. Members of the committee, thank you very much. This is a very important issue. It gets to the heart.
Pull the mic a little closer to, I'm sorry.
It gets to the heart of our entire system of government. My name is Dan Schneider. I'm the Vice President at the Media Research Center. For over 4 decades, MRC has been documenting and exposing media bias, and in recent years, we've added the big tech election interference and other big tech bias in silencing speech. We have launched Censor Track, which has documented over 7,000 cases of censorship by big tech in inappropriate ways. And much of that is related to elections and trying to impact the outcome of elections. Corporations are allowed to engage in electioneering under Supreme Court doctrine, but it's a narrow path to do that. I have other colleagues who will probably explore that a little more, but what I want to do is point out how big tech tries to influence elections, and it almost always goes in one direction. Not necessarily in a partisan direction, but these big tech platforms like Google and Facebook and Twitter will have a candidate of choice, a preferred candidate, and any candidate in the way of that individual will be censored, and content supporting that candidate will be silenced. I will give you some examples. Google, which I believe is the platform that is most notorious and most effective at swaying elections, and Dr. Robert Epstein will explain that a bit later, I think, silences people in nefarious and secretive ways. So we just had 4 Republican presidential debates over the course of over 100 days. We at the Media Research Center did 2 studies consistently throughout those 100 days, including the night before each one of those Republican presidential debates. We did a search for Democrat presidential campaign websites and a second search for Republican presidential campaign websites. The Google search results were consistent for 100 straight days. Joe Biden's campaign website was always in the top 3 of search results, as might be expected. Marianne Williamson was also in the top 5. Never was Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s campaign website produced by Google. It was completely buried, never to be found. The single greatest threat to Joe Biden's renomination was buried by Google. More surprisingly is what we discovered when we searched for Republican presidential campaign websites. Again, for over 100 days, we did these searches on clean computers throughout the country. Google produced only 2 campaign websites. The first was Marianne Williamson again. The second was for Will Hurd, who, as I think members of this committee know particularly well, never broke 1% in national polling, and by the time he withdrew from the race was less than 0.5%. Those were the only 2 campaign websites that Google would allow people to find. If you look at the Google News tabs, the great bulk of the news links that Google permits people to find, 20 times more links to liberal websites than conservative websites. And under the Google News tabs, if you search for Trump or Biden or elections, 0% of the links are to right-of-center media outlets. These are just 2 examples for how Google very specifically and in a very planned and coordinated way tries to manipulate the way people think about elections and who they vote for. Facebook is on the rise in terms of its censorship. We had seen evidence that maybe it was declining its censorship practices, but in just recent weeks we've seen that it's ramping it up. The most notorious of the Facebook election interference practices was when they in fact took down the New York Post story about Hunter Biden laptop and the Biden family practices abroad, which raised serious criminal and legal questions. These practices are oftentimes claimed to be to fight misinformation, disinformation, hate speech, etc. But these big tech platforms worked aggressively to support the idea that Donald Trump was a Russian asset, which we all know was fabricated, and did everything they could to hide the fact that the Biden family is involved in in possibly criminal activities. And of course, they did this right before the 2020 election. We now see big tech election interference on the rise, not only in America, but overseas. And it's being done very specifically to help the candidate of their choice win election. Thank you, sir. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you for your testimony. We're going to hear from each of the witnesses and then come back with questions. We'll have some for you. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Vorhies, introduce yourself and give us your testimony. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Zach Vorhies, and thank you, Chairman Hughes, Vice Chair Paxton, and members of the committee for listening to my story. I was a Google engineer for 8.5 years and a whistleblower against Google in 2019, risking my career and livelihood to warn the public about Google's plans to meddle in the 2020 election using a program called Machine Learning Fairness. This disclosure was done through Project Veritas. I will briefly mention my background. I graduated in 2006 from the University of Oregon with a triple major in computer science, psychology, and mathematics. I worked on Star Wars and Indiana Jones games before being hired at Google. If you've used Google Earth or YouTube for game consoles, you're familiar with my work. Let's talk about Google's censorship AI system called Machine Learning Fairness. I discovered this program while searching for information about Project Dragonfly, probably a fake project meant to misdirect the public. Make no mistake, Machine Learning Fairness is and has always been the real censorship program, and it is massive. The goal was to, quote, program the public to align with Google's corporate values. Those are their words. This was a 4-step process laid out by the AI ethicist Margaret Mitchell, who has since been fired for unethical behavior. Step 1, training data are collected and classified. Step 2, algorithms are programmed. Step 3, media are filtered, ranked, aggregated, or generated. And step 4, people like us are programmed. That's a direct quote from their slides. And it wasn't just in one slide, it was littered throughout the company. This process was repeated in a cycle, with step 4 feeding back into step 1. This sounds like something out of a conspiracy theory, but it's real. Google rewrote their news algorithms, specifically trained on mainstream media stories targeting Trump, such as his fight with Comey. Systems like real-time events, real-time boost, and HiveMind assign higher amplification scores to stories related to targeting Trump. Google's internal documents revealed their stance on, quote, algorithmic unfairness. They stated that even factually accurate representations could be considered algorithmically unfair and removed. And let me just quote them. For example, imagine a Google image query for CEOs shows predominantly men. Even if it were a factually accurate representation of the world, it would be algorithmic unfairness. In some cases, it may be appropriate to take no action if the system accurately reflects current reality, while in other cases, it may be desirable to consider how we might help society reach a more fair and equitable state via either product intervention or broader corporate social responsibility efforts, end quote. Let's talk about news ranking. News sites that supported Democrats were ranked with the highest quality and trustworthiness. Here's a partial list. Wall Street Journal, 8.53. CBS News, 6.57. CNN, 6.0. Fox News, 5.2. Russia Today, 4.57. The Young Turks, 2.53. Alex Jones Network, negative 1.56. At the bottom of the list is Next News Network at negative 3.35. Let me reiterate, the foreign propaganda outlet Russia Today was scored 7 points higher than the Next News Network, one of the top YouTube news networks in America. Since my disclosure, Next News Network has been permanently demonetized and will soon be bankrupted. These sound more like the actions we'd expect from a Russian propaganda complex. But shockingly, it's the actions of Google. At YouTube, I observed 40 different AIs classifying videos under various labels. Influencers like Dave Rubin were labeled as right-wing news outlets with fake news labels. The justification was always user safety. But in 2020, this system of censorship went so far as to ban mentions of vitamin C, turmeric, and vitamin D during the pandemic. Despite public statements to Congress, Google has many blacklists, some literally named blacklist.txt. For example, the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution of Ireland, shockingly, was blacklisted from YouTube. We need to investigate this, and we need to put a stop to what's going on, and the public needs to know what's going on. There are a few systems that are out there. One of them, my colleague, Dr. Robert Epstein, with his TechWatch project, is the only one that I know that is auditing Google and showing the bias that they're having. And I yield the rest of my time, and thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Hartig, welcome. Introduce yourself and give us your testimony.
Hi, my name is Ryan Hartwig, and I was employed in Phoenix, Arizona from March of 2018 to February of 2020. And for those 23 months, I worked as a content moderator for Facebook under the subcontractor Cognizant Technology Solutions. I personally reviewed over 70,000 pieces of content while working for Facebook, and all types of content on both Facebook and Instagram. While working for Facebook, I noticed the company had a particular interest in politics and would often bend or break their own rules with, for example, newsworthy exceptions. Subsequently, I reached out to Project Veritas, who provided me with a covert camera. I began filming for the next 9 months inside Cognizant's content moderation facilities. I published a book analyzing Facebook's practices titled Behind the Mask of Facebook, a whistleblower's shocking story of big tech bias and censorship, with my co-author Kent Heckenlively, JD. This past week, on Twitter, journalist Michael Schellenberger released the Twitter Files CIA, showing that members of the intelligence community were involved in an attempted takeover of Twitter's content management system. What I observed at Facebook includes interference in U.S. election activities, along with influence in foreign countries. Here are just a few examples of what I observed and documented. In July of 2018, here in Texas, a 16-year-old teenager was wearing a MAGA hat and was attacked while eating at a Whataburger in San Antonio. Facebook instructed us to delete this viral video, seen millions of times, because it showed cursing toward a minor, despite there being many instances of the video in which the cursing was bleeped out. We continually flagged political content with the label VI, which had the effect of routing it to Facebook employees for further review. Facebook also instructed us on how to take action on political speech during the 2018 midterms. They told us to delete the phrase monkeying things up and told us how to interpret the phrase used by Ron DeSantis as hate speech. This was during the 2018 Florida gubernatorial race against Andrew Gillum. Facebook had election training decks for the 2018 midterms, not only for US politics, but globally as well, for countries like Poland, Taiwan, Canada, and Argentina. I also had limited access to some training material for Brazilian Facebook employees. Facebook had us monitor, track, and flag content related to Spain's Basque and Catalonian nationalism separatist movement. Facebook instructed us to delete a post in Venezuela, which was a call to arms for the Venezuelan revolution. Facebook specifically instructed us to ignore human smuggling content that explains gaps in border patrols or explain how it's done. Fellow whistleblowers Tara Rodas and Aaron Stevenson have both shown further evidence on how the U.S. government is involved in human smuggling and trafficking. And the last example I want to share is that I never received any type of legal training from Facebook or any state or government officials on what is deemed election content or with regard to any state or federal election laws. Since 2020, when I came out as a whistleblower, I've done hundreds of interviews on the topic of content moderation in dozens of countries worldwide, because the topic of free speech online is a matter of global importance. I helped submit much of this evidence in the Murthy versus Missouri case in March of 2024 that went to the Supreme Court. My whistleblower's writ of qui tam was in the nature of an amicus brief submitted by Dr. Three Rivers. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court rejected our writ intentionally, mischaracterizing it as an amicus. Dr. Three Rivers is a trustee and counsel for the Hawaiian Nation and the Federation of Indigenous Nations. I also serve as a notary, clerk of courts, and judge for their federation. In addition to serving with the Federation of Indigenous Nations, I also serve as an officer with the Social Media Freedom Foundation. Jason Fick, the founder of the foundation, has been fighting to correct the court's application of Section 230 for 6 years now. He too has been to the Supreme Court twice and is currently headed toward the Supreme Court a third time. After years of litigation, it seems the courts are not interested in resolving the disaster that we face online. So I now call upon the Texas legislature to take action against Meta to prevent further disruption of the 2024 local and national elections. I myself was born in Alaska, and it's an honor to be here in the great state of Texas. And I want to call on all of you, all the members of the committee here, to take action, to help all of America and the world to fight against the tyranny of Meta. And with that, I yield.
Thank you for your testimony. Senators, any questions for the panel? I've got a few, but I want to let the Senator Zaffarini, Dean Zaffarini, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To any member of the panel or to all, what recommendations would you have for this legislature to take action to address the issues you address?
Can I go ahead and speak? My recommendation is subpoenas would be filed against Google for any documents that have the name blacklist.txt related to Google, YouTube, and their news search corpuses. I would also ask that you subpoena their documents related to rankings of media outlets. I've provided a supplemental showing a slide deck including such a list. That is 4 years old. It's a bit dated. The open question now is, what are the updated rankings of the media outlets that they have? Also, machine learning fairness is so huge. I don't even know how you would even swallow that. But if you could do, ask them, file a subpoena, ask them for documents related to machine learning fairness. And that is going to be such a huge bombshell that it just needs to get into the public disclosure. So it's those three things: machine learning fairness, blacklists, and their media rankings is the start of the entire thing.
Do you have the experience, and if you don't, just say so, to inform us what the cost of such studies would be or such actions?
I've got a lot of expertise. I worked for them for 8.5 years.
No, but to give us the information regarding what the legislature would have to spend, what the cost to us would be to take those actions.
I'm not familiar with how Senate, processes
That's why I
work,
asked.
but
Right.
I've got 950 pages that I've released, so I can reduce the cost significantly.
All right, thank you. Did you have something?
I just wanted to mention, subpoenas are great if that's possible. I just want to emphasize the importance of having maybe a local liaison with Meta or Facebook for Texas. It's astounding that all these countries in the world are being moderated and censored by Facebook, and nobody has a local representative. Like, I talked to a legislator in Argentina a couple of years ago, and they wanted a way to contact Facebook or Meta. So, subpoenas are great. Just the fact that these companies are enforcing election law in your state. And I don't know if that's against the law, but if there can be subpoenas issued for that, but at the very least force them to have a local liaison for Texas.
Thank you.
Senator, just briefly, it's important for you all to know that Google and Facebook and these other big tech firms they've resurrected the Plessy versus Ferguson standard. They believe that not only can they discriminate against people based on political viewpoint, they can and in fact do discriminate against people based on race and religion. Facebook just recently took down the site of a religious group specifically because they were concerned that its existence might harm people in India. These are the Sikhs of India. And in the Supreme Court, they have specifically argued that their rights are greater than the rights than civil rights law created here in the United States. So what can you do? You can actually subpoena these companies to find out why they think that their rights to discriminate against people based on race, religion, and political viewpoint are valid, and resurrect the centuries-long tradition of common carrier laws that prohibit discrimination based on these things when a service is provided broadly.
Thank you. What criteria do Facebook and Google use in directing their employees to take certain actions such as labeling content incorrect or inappropriate?
Can I answer that? Yeah. We're not privy to that information. It's a private group that does that, the content moderation policy, and their policies are not open for employees to know exactly how they operate.
So employees are supposed to take action but don't know the criteria? for taking-
The committees do, but that information, as far as I know, is not something that I, as a regular, like I was not on the content, I was a software engineer, independent contributor within the company. So I was only able to get information that was internally available to all employees at the company.
Did you have something to add?
Yeah, so I have access to the criteria. So we called it publicly you know it as the community standards, but they have a policy called implementation standards, or IS. That's the basis for decisions. That's the criteria to take content down. And so it's very lengthy. It was written by their attorneys, but every job I would look at, so I have 30 seconds to make a decision, but I'd have to consult those implementation standards. And that was a criteria that Facebook gave us to delete content.
It's a constant moving target. What we have seen in disclosed documents is that the policies that may exist at any one point would be overruled by individuals who would make unilateral decisions. But our research shows that the candidates who would be taken down were those candidates opposing the preferred individual by these companies. Hillary Clinton, when she was running in 2008, got taken down by Facebook and Google. In 2016, candidates opposing her were taken down. So it's done on a bipartisan basis. It's just whoever's threatening the candidate of choice is to be targeted.
Thank you. And go ahead.
If I can add one thing, what might be a really cheap way to get at this information is to ask what the decision process was for demonetizing Next News Network, right? Like they're very large, and if you can get that information related to that case, I think that that's going to sort of illuminate what their decision-making processes were for that demonetization. Like they're still demonetized. They've been demonetized for like 6 months, like the top conservative news network on YouTube. And the question is, why did they get demonetized? And if we have the answer to that, we're going to get the answers to a whole bunch of other like censorship activities with the company.
Thank you. And specifically for you, what was the impact of your disclosure?
The impact of my disclosure was, in what way? Like,
To the public reaction?
oh, it was one of the major stories of 2019, the biggest disclosure by Project Veritas, their biggest story they've ever had. We had two disclosures, one in June when I was anonymous. In August, I came out publicly after being raided by the FBI, including the bomb squad, Sheriff's Department, and SFPD, with a standoff that ended at gunpoint. So, and it was all due to a wellness check. And I just didn't want to come out, and so it just kept on escalating, and they shut down the streets from 20th of Valencia to 22nd. And I realized that if I don't come out, they're going to come in. So I came out at gunpoint, surrendered myself, and then flew to Washington, D.C., and then went to New York, disclosed, came out as myself. And then ever since I came out, they've left me alone, and I haven't heard a peep from them since.
And did the social media react to the impact, the reaction of the public?
The reaction of the public was massive. Like, it was a massive story.
Did the social media react to the response?
Did it lead to a
Did they take
change?
Any actions?
Not only did they turned off the censorship for about 3 months, and then COVID happened, and then the censorship came back. And the person that was busted in the sting operation by the name of Jen Janai, you may have heard that name recently, she was handed Google's entire AI alignment with that Google Gemini thing where it was like there were black Nazis and, the founding fathers were, female Indians and Native Americans. Like, that's her thing. Instead of like putting her to the side, they elevated her and they gave her the entire AI alignment. And that's the reason why Google's in this hot water right now, is because she is the most radical leftist, one of the most radical leftists at the company. And instead of responding to the public outcry, they went in exactly the opposite direction.
So with Facebook, some of the results that we have had is soon after I went public in June of 2020, I submitted evidence to Congressman Matt Gaetz, and that led to a criminal referral to the DOJ for Mark Zuckerberg because Mark Zuckerberg allegedly lied under oath by testifying that they do not censor political content when he testified to Congress about that. And then I also helped with an FEC complaint against Facebook in Michigan for the John James versus Gary Peters Senate race, and also submitted evidence with Laura Loomer's RICO lawsuit against Facebook. So those are some of the results so far. But as I mentioned, I've spoken to members of Congress in Brazil and Argentina and other countries as well who are also facing the same issues that Texas is facing.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. And Dean, with your question on their policies, how they decide what to block, what to promote, you'll recall House Bill 20, which this committee moved in 2021 on that topic about being put in Facebook jail. That came up in the hearing, as I recall. And that case was in front of the U.S. Supreme Court about a month ago. We were there. The Attorney General Paxton and his team defended that case. And we hope, as that case moves forward, that through the discovery process, which you're familiar with, we'll be able to get some of these answers, because it really is such a secretive thing, and they have a lot of power. Thank you for your questions, Dean. Members, any other questions for the panel? Senator Birdwell.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to ask some very rudimentary questions, if I may. As a private entity, are any of the biases that you've described purchased by those individuals to be biased that way? Are they selling a preference, so they're not just simply doing it of their own accord. They're receiving compensation to demonstrate such a bias? Anybody can answer.
Yeah. So, as sort of a liability shield, Google is outsourcing some of their alignment decisions to the ADL and SLPC, which are highly
ADL. I mean, you're throwing acronyms out.
Anti-Defamation League, the Southern Poverty Law Center. Those are the two main ones that I know in which they're outsourcing their decision processes to. A lot of them are internal as well, and it's my belief, but I don't have any evidence for this right now, that they have some sort of deal with the pharmaceutical cartels, and they were caught in collusion with the New York Times. So, for example, remember that Covfefe thing that happened 2017? Well, the New York Times had a conversation with them, and they deleted the word Covfefe from their Arabic to English translation dictionary, which the original translation is "we will stand up." So if you do the whole tweet, despite the constant negative press, Covfefe, that translated to despite the negative constant press, we will stand up. They deleted that word, and then the Washington Post said, let's use the 22nd Amendment to get rid of the president because he's tweeting nonsense. Well, it's nonsense because they made it nonsense because they deleted it out of their translation dictionary. So the New York Times has been talking with them. I believe that the pharmaceutical cartels have been talking with them. And they are outsourcing their decision-making processes to the Anti-Defamation League and Southern Poverty Law Center.
In outsourcing, I'll use the word subcontract. Would
Sure.
that be inaccurate? So in subcontracting those decisions, the entities for which you used to work are expecting some sort of legal protection by saying, we didn't do it, these other folks did it, even though, in my view, as an old military guy, you're responsible for everything your unit does or fails to do. And if you ask a subordinate to do something, you are just as responsible for the failure of that subordinate as if you did it yourself.
Right. And
Okay.
there's also the factor of Section 230, which means that they can't be, they have immunity for the content moderation policy decisions that they make.
And that's what HB 20, if I recall what we dealt with on 230. So let me ask this, because I'm trying to think through what interim hearings are designed to figure out how we might draft legislation. And while I know this is the chairman's main lane, as a common carrier, not just nationally but internationally, is it possible for Texas to compartmentalize the Googles and the and the Twitters and the Facebooks, kind of like insurance is compartmentalized among the states. You know, you can't be a company in Wyoming right now selling insurance in Texas. You have to come get licensed in Texas. Is it possible for Texas law to compel the Googles and the Facebooks of the world to say, if you have an IP ad, and I'm very rudimentary, look, I don't know what, kind of like Oddball and Kelly's Heroes. I just write them. I don't know what makes them work, okay? But if I've got an IP address in Texas and I do a Google search, does that take me to the IP of Google in Texas that keeps it from being biased? But other states might still have a biased search in California, Illinois, because without a federal, and I don't look for federal solutions on so many things, but because Article 1 says interstate commerce is regulated by the federal government. And of course, the way the founders meant regulated was to mean regularly occurring, not just put rocks in the rucksacks of businesses just for the fun of it. But is that the dynamic we're dealing with, as to the legislation that this committee might hear in the coming legislative session would compel, kind of like when the federal government broke up Bell into all the regionals? Are we basically talking about breaking up Facebook and Google into, if you're in Texas and you search something under Texas law, the Google search engine has to be in Texas and it cannot have these biases without punishment by Texas law? But you might still have the same problem in California, but that's for Californians to figure out.
Well,
Is that what we're dealing with?
I would,
Can I answer this? Because I got the perfect solution. I think the easiest first step for this is to require all searches done in Texas to be proxied through a Texas server. That doesn't mean that they actually have to have a data farm in there. That means that there is a point in Texas that the information has to get through. And if you have that, then you've basically got a center that can log the information. There's a paper trail. And right now you don't have that paper trail. It's all tunneling to California or Indiana, to one of the big data centers in the East Coast. So if you would require Google to proxy all traffic as your first step, then you would have that audit trail that you would be able to then have under Texas jurisdiction. There's also one other point that I want to bring up, and that is currently, Google's got an Achilles heel, which is their forum selection clause that is in their terms of service. And what this forum selection clause does is it requires that if there's any problem with Google or YouTube or Facebook and all the big tech, you got to sue them in California court, either at their state court or in a district court under their jurisdiction. I raised $145,000. We sued Google. And that's what happened to us. We all got sent right to California and right into their rigged system. And they're
Kind of like what we dealt with New York this past session, what the issue was, but yeah.
Like, if you guys can somehow eliminate the forum selection clause just for big tech, every single problem that Google does, they're going to be able to be sued in your court system right here in the great state of Texas.
You wanted to?
yeah, just on the first question about the pay to play, basically, are people being paid, are companies or people being paid to get certain content allowed?
Well, is somebody writing a check that says, make me the #1 hit when somebody?
Gotcha. Yeah. So I do know that Jason Fick, who I've worked with closely at FYK, his Facebook page had over 30 million followers, and he was basically they took down his page and sold it to someone else because he wasn't paying enough in Facebook ads. So that was the premise of his original case against Facebook, which went to the Supreme Court. They chose not to hear it. So now he's has a constitutional challenge against the government. But I do know that they have the VIP X check, so kind of a whitelist for famous people. So if you're really famous, then you can't be taken down. So and they have certain shields and protections, so certain content or persons don't get taken down. Now, is there money changing hands? I don't know if there's money changing hands.
Well, because what we have, based upon what I tracked, and I don't remember all the cases you've mentioned, but I think it's a standard assumption of the bias of the the social media companies for which you were formerly employed.
Yeah.
I don't think that's in question. The challenge before the committee is what's the line of respect for private entity, knowing it's a common carrier, and where's the point of the fulcrum on that seesaw where the legislation has to be, so that we're not going beyond where government shouldn't tell private entities how to run their business,
Yeah.
but knowing the unique nature of this business, what's fair to the public.
Yeah.
And that's that's a precision weapon that is very difficult to figure out. But that's why I asked the question about, do we do something that compels, kind of like insurance, compels them to break up? Okay, here's Google for Texas, here's Google for, and that's, I think, the
Yeah.
process that I think you're telling me we have to start. Am I correct?
Well, yeah, Senator, the Supreme Court, of course, as you know, is hearing 3 different cases right now. And we are at risk of losing the First Amendment entirely. The Google, Facebook attorney has argued that our individual rights to free speech are nothing compared to the government's right to free speech, to coordinate with big tech to silence individuals, which of course turns the First Amendment upside down. If the Supreme Court goes the wrong way on that, there's almost nothing you can do to enforce common carrier laws. Let me suggest another avenue, getting to your previous question. These big tech firms, it's not, I wouldn't characterize them as subcontracting, but they coordinate, collude with advertisers and media ratings firms like NewsGuard and Adfontes, and then other organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center and ADL, that used to care about the rights of individuals, and now they're just politicized radical left-wing organizations that exist to silence everyday Americans. This collusion, I believe, is in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act and then similar laws at the state level that prohibit illegal restraint on trade. So I think that could be a very good avenue for this committee and for the Attorney General to explore.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Senator. Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have just 2 questions for Mr. Vorhies. Could you repeat the goal of the Machine Learning Fairness Program?
Yeah, it's a 4-step process.
And, well, and that's my second question, the 4 steps.
What was your first question?
So the first question is, I think you stated verbatim the actual goal of that program.
The goal was to program the public to align with Google's corporate values.
So to program the public.
Yes, and that's a quote by Google.
Okay, so that's verbatim, that's their stated goal, is to program the public.
Yeah, in fact, the entire quote is, people like us are programmed. You'll see in the testimony that I said that people are programmed, but there's different variations of that. The longer variation is people, in parentheses, like us.
Like us?
Like us,
Okay.
are programmed.
Okay.
And they see their search engine as the method of which they program us.
And that is a 4-step program. And could you repeat those 4 steps?
Yes, the 4 steps are: step 1, training data are collected and classified. Step 2, algorithms are programmed. Step 3, media are filtered, ranked, aggregated, or generated. Step 4, people are programmed. And then this cycle repeats going back to step 1. And so by cycling through, they eventually move the population to align with their corporate values.
Media are filtered, ranked, aggregated,
Or generated.
or generated.
Yeah,
That's
so
disturbing.
synthetic data, I guess AI, right? Like we'll just generate data, and articles will just generate articles and then aggregate and rank them. So
Thank you for your very disturbing answers.
thank you very much.
Senator Parker, you're recognized. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate you all very much being here today and taking us through your personal experiences. I want to just kind of dive down for a moment with regard to the bias that's obviously coming through these systems. Of course, today in an AI world, it's accelerating dramatically the last 12 months, and you're going to see additional acceleration dramatically the next 24 to 36 months. But I want to know, with regard to these decision-making processes, historically, when you were there, what percentage were manual versus those that were an algorithm that was driving the process?
So I know that when, as a content moderator, they did tell us that we were training, part of our job was to train the AI with certain types of imagery. So we would recognize, like, if someone's wearing a bikini versus, you know, a bra or things like that, or a swimsuit, we would train the AI that way. So that was one of our functions. Now Facebook would dump jobs into our queues, and so but they could choose what jobs they would dump. So when Greta, for example, this is a great example. So Greta Thunberg was being attacked by Trump, or people were calling her retarded, like a play on words. And so Facebook dumped a lot of jobs into our queues that were of people attacking Greta Thunberg. So we actioned those manually, but we were actioning all, for a week straight, it was all Greta Thunberg, because Facebook chose what we were moderating manually. So I know there is an AI that goes through, and there's one called Hive, I think, that is an AI that helps with content moderation. So there's definitely a component to that. I didn't have any specific access to what they were doing with the AI and how that filtered, but I do know that they could filter words and dump those into our queue. It was called a proactive pull, is when they drop those into our queue to moderate. So, yeah.
And remind me, what was the last year that you were there involved, just to kind of understand where they were on the life cycle of the technology?
Yeah, I was there the last month I was there was February of 2020.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So the AI has just dramatically accelerated probably since that time, obviously.
I'm sure it has. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And I would like to concur. I did briefly date someone that was on the content moderation team at YouTube, and they said that they were training artificial intelligence to do the job that they were doing manually.
Okay. So does that mean, in your assessment, that the manual piece is going away completely? Or what percentage do you think is manual versus leaving it to the algorithm?
I think it has to be bootstrapped. So it has to be bootstrapped by initial, sort of humans. Basically say, okay, this is something that we all agree is the way that we want the content moderation to go. And then that is used as the training data for the artificial intelligence, which then takes over. And then they do periodic checks to make sure that it's performing as expected.
Very good. Thank you very much.
I just want to note, so in addition to that, I mean, we had the policies and whatnot, but we had also, Facebook could always make newsworthy exceptions anytime they wanted to make an exception for anything. So if they decided that, Melissa Milano's doing hate speech for saying that men shouldn't be allowed to make laws about women's bodies, that's a violation of their hate speech policy, but Facebook made an exception and allowed hate speech for Alyssa Milano. Or when Don Lemon said white males are terror threats, Facebook made a newsworthy exception. So they have all these policies in place, but they can change their rules willy-nilly.
In that process you just described, what does that look like? What's the decision tree matrix when it gets to that committee to make that review? What does it take, if you will, to get to that point?
It comes from the top. So they would, we would just get a memo or a message from our Facebook superiors, and they would let us know, hey, we're having all these jobs coming in your queue about Don Lemon or Alyssa Milano talking about abortion, and they would instruct us specifically how to action it.
So you would actually get a memo from the senior management of the organization. So it would stem from the very highest levels down to the operational team. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And how frequently did you see those kind of memos that would come out, so to speak, with regard to giving direction to the field operating staff?
It could come. It could be weekly, twice a week. Anytime there was a major incident or a possible PR fire, like a public relations incident fire, or something that could cause reputational damage to Facebook, they could give us guidance on that.
And the memo, and I know it's been a number of years, but when you think back up to those memos, would it be the head of the operational group that you were a part of? I know you were on the engineering team. Or would it come from a chief operating officer? Would it come from a CEO? Can you speak to that for a moment?
So I was not on the engineering team, but we internally used a group that looked a tool. They looks kind of like Facebook, called Facebook Workplace, and so it was a post made in the Facebook Workplace by someone at Cognizant. So it wasn't directly from a Facebook employee, but it was many times they would say, "Hey, Facebook asked us to tell you to do this." So it was coming from our management team internally with Cognizant, but they were telling us that this is what the client wanted. Like our client was Facebook. Our job was to make them happy.
I see. And Zach, did you see similar things? How did it work within the shop when you were there?
Can you clarify a little bit?
Well, just with regard to the comment that was made a moment ago, is that you'd get a memo, if you will, from senior management with regard to a particular exception that needed to be granted on something that was a current topic, something that was popular, if you will, out there in the bloodstream of the country or the world. And I'm curious whether or not you would see anything in writing, a chain of command, if you will, any kind of memo that would dictate that something needed to be flagged a particular way or held aside with regard to reflecting the bias of the organization that was coming from a higher level.
Right. So yes, but only in the negative. So in order to censor content. So for example, when the Las Vegas massacre happened in October of 2017, and also the Pizzagate files, when they came out, for both of those, there was a code red in which the whole company got together and said, there is a flood of fake news coming out, and what we need to do is we need to get all of our divisions aligned and to start censoring the information related to these events. And it was, so for example, the Pizzagate thing, which WikiLeaks released, that was when fake news became a common household name. That created the fake news team and allowed them to design their systems to censor all of the information in America. It was literally Pizzagate, right? And if you look at Google Trends, you'll see that fake news trended one day after the Pizzagate released the files. With the Las Vegas massacre, that allowed them to inject their YouTube blacklist, which didn't exist prior to this event. And from there, it was like basically covering up, rumors that this was a false flag event. And then it went all the way down to, as I noted, the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution of Ireland, right? And the last term that I saw when I disclosed this list was AMLO. Now, what does AMLO mean? That is the nickname of the Mexican president at the time. So, they started off possibly with noble goals, but at the end, they were censoring constitutional amendments for our allies and presidential candidates in other countries.
Thank you, Zach. And one final question. Were you with Google as an employee or a contractor as well? Just trying to understand the dynamic.
I was a full-time employee. I was a senior software engineer.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you
y'all being here.
Senator Middleton, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I had a question on, obviously they're, censoring based on ideology and throttling people's social media and news feed and searches. But what about paid sponsored ads? So, where you'll have a conservative group, say they're like the pro-life group is trying to advertise their annual gala or something on Facebook or maybe promoted on Google. Do you think that they are actually, you're getting less for your money as a conservative group if you're sponsoring it on and paying for that promotion on Facebook versus a more left liberal group? In other words, you're not getting the same for your money. Essentially, the product is not the same product, even though they're advertising. It's supposed to be the same product.
Let me mention real quickly. What I can say to that is we did have a team called Brand Integrity. I was not on that team, but they would label certain things as with political content. So they would, if you're doing an ad about cats, then you put someone would pay for an advertisement for cat food, right? So we'd want to label that type of advertisement. So that was called Brand Integrity. So I know that they did label political content a certain way. So that could impact if you're paying for ads, and maybe they had a wait list. I don't have knowledge of that, of what they actually the actions they took. And then the other thing I want to mention is that when Kavanaugh was running for the Supreme Court Justice, Brett Kavanaugh, there were ads. There was a campaign that they were promoting, Facebook was promoting, told us to make sure to promote it and make sure there was not any fake campaigns for Christine Blasey Ford. So Facebook specifically had us make sure that campaign didn't have any fakes, and then that the correct campaign was promoted. So that's one example. And they have, I think, they have nonprofits who fundraise, and that was a fundraiser through Facebook. So it wasn't necessarily an advertisement. So those are the two things I know of that kind of connect to that question.
I don't know of any price differences. I wish I did. What I do know is that the majority of the efforts were based upon outright censorship. Hey, this isn't brand safe, or we don't want this for advertisers. Then you're off. Emails from Gmail for certain candidates going directly into the spam box or not even being delivered at all. And so that's typically the way that they did their censorship. I don't know of any price differences.
Right.
Senator, at the Media Research Center, we're looking into this question right now. We have access to thousands and thousands of ads that were attempted to be placed by political candidates. And what we've seen is that Republican political candidates, their ads are taken down at a far greater rate than Democrats. And with very unequal treatment. For example, the Donald Trump campaign tried to place an ad that referenced Antifa. And included in that ad was then the Antifa logo. And both Google and Facebook took down those ads claiming that it contained violent representation. Yet, on Facebook, the Antifa account still exists with the same logo. So Donald Trump cannot use the logo, but Antifa can. Now, so far, we have not found a way to determine if people are getting the same bang for the buck. If when a campaign puts a Democrat puts $100 behind an ad and a Republican puts $100 behind an ad, if they have the same reach. As far as we know today, only internal documents could show that. That might be another good way to look farther into what's going on here.
That's what I'm getting at, is the fraud and the inducement, and that is fraud. If you're advertising a uniform product and you're giving someone basically less bang for their buck and taking their money and giving someone, just because of their ideology, more bang for their buck, then you have defrauded people. So that is a crime, and that's kind of what I'm getting at here.
If I can just add, that was the nature of so I helped with the FEC complaints against, and in Michigan, the John James versus Gary Peters Senate race, John James made an ad about transgender sports, and Facebook took it down. And so Facebook effectively made an in-kind contribution to the campaign of the Democrat. And so that's one example.
And I want to add that if there was a price difference, the way that Google would probably do it is they would allow some sort of exploit that a third-party system would know about, and then use that to exploit it. So, for example, let's say someone places an ad, and then there's a bot network that clicks on that ad to generate fake clicks. What Google's role would be in that scenario is that they would allow those fake clicks. They wouldn't register those as fake clicks, and then they would have that shield of liability where they can say, oh, we didn't know that was like a bot network, but in reality, there might be an internal bug network where people are actually, engineers are saying, hey, this is kind of weird, but then it just never gets looked into. If I could just give one quick example, you guys may know of Jordan B. Peterson. He got his entire Gmail account, YouTube, wiped for like a week. And I was able to see the bug on that. And what happened was someone got his email address, and some people started making similar accounts that were off by one letter. And what happened is that the AI flagged every single account that was related and similar sounding, just took them all off. Now, the original Gmail account was there for a decade, and all the fake ones were there, were created in the last day, right? And so the question that the engineers had is, wait, this seems wrong. Why are we taking down an account that's been here for a decade? Why don't we just take down the other accounts? And that problem was never fixed. So it's my expectation that they have certain exploits that they're giving to third parties, and that those third parties are actually doing, the fake clicks or the takedowns, and Google's saying, oh, we didn't know.
Thank you.
Senator Parker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up for a moment on the questioning from Senator Middleton for a moment. So I understand the blatant blocking, so to speak, that you've experienced and what you just described. But is there a specifically different algorithm for one ideological view versus another on the same topic? Do we know, is there any documentation of it? I mean, you obviously, Zach, had a unique perspective as a senior engineer. Is there a different algorithm between one side of an issue versus the other? I just wanted to just drive down and get a specific answer.
Let me give you. It's not even secret. It's their SEO search rankings. It's like a report that they give out for people that are trying to do search engine optimization, and their page rank algorithm. They're kind of like they're open about it, and what they plainly state in this is that every single page, topic, or website is given an EAT score. And that is an acronym that stands for expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. And what they say and how they rank these sites is that they say, well, what does Wikipedia have to say? And this is like all over, like Wikipedia, Wikipedia, Wikipedia. Look, if you get a hit on your Wikipedia page, your website, your campaign is going down, right? If the media's like, they literally say that, what does Wikipedia have to say? What does the mainstream media have to say, on Google News? And the thing is that they're ranking all of this biased content. And so all the stuff that the search engine, it's like that cycle that I said, they're amplifying their own bias, and then they're judging your campaign on their bias, and then they're presenting this to the public as this is how we're ranking. So it's not even secret. It's open to the public, and that's how the complex system works.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that with me. And then, Dan, I'm curious whether or not you and Brent and everybody at the Media Research Center have seen similar, examples or stories specifically to the technical algorithm that's driving bias one way or the other beyond just blatant blocking. Just curious as to your thoughts there, what you've seen.
Well, of course, we do not have access to the
Sure.
algorithms, and similar to that, it's important when we're talking about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence begins with people drafting algorithms.
Yes.
And these algorithms we know that they're biased based on two factors or two results. One is how we measure the output. When 20 times as many liberal links on Google News tab versus conservative links. Dr. Epstein, who will testify later, shows the impact on how people vote, and 6 to 8 million people's votes swayed, and he'll testify to that later. But at MRC, what we know is that those algorithms are drafted in a way specifically to achieve outcomes, and these outcomes oftentimes are articulated by the corporate leadership. So after the 2016 election, the most senior Google employees specifically had an all-hands-on meeting vowing that this would never be allowed to happen again. And their resources were put into altering future election outcomes. And it's going on to this day. And artificial intelligence is only amplifying that. And we've seen it in the most absurd ways, but it's now very visible to the entire public.
Thank you all very much for being here.
Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One other question that is sort of ancillary, I think, around all of this is, as you're talking about this goal of programming the public, do you have any data on how individuals 18 and younger are targeted, if at all, differently than people that are of the age of majority?
Yeah, and the person that actually has a lot of this data is Dr. Robert Epstein. I would defer to him to answer that sort of questions, but yes, they do. And there's a very disturbing thing that happened. I think it's called Ezragate or Elsagate. It's these cartoons that were being cycled on YouTube. They started off great, and then the parents would be like, "Okay, this is great," and they would leave, and then eventually they would switch to a really messed up cartoon. Now, I worked for Lucasfilm for a year. All right, their licensing department is top. You can't do anything with Star Wars without them knocking on your door. For some reason, there were these cartoon farms that were creating these low-quality cartoons using Spider-Man, Batman, all this stuff involving drug use, alcohol, sexualization. These are aimed at kids. And it was being snuck into these YouTube feeds. And at some point, everyone's like, it just caught on fire and became this big thing. And then YouTube took it off and kind of disappeared. But the archives of these videos still exist online. And I think it's called Elsa Gate or Ezra Gate. I can't remember which one it's called. It happened in 2017. But what Dr. Robert Epstein has discovered is that it's still happening, but on a lesser extent. And it sounds wild, but it literally happened.
So something that looks positive and wholesome or whatever, safe for kids at first glance, but as it continues into the duration of the video, it becomes something that a parent might have some issues with. So it sort of lures them into a false sense of security.
Yeah, it's the up next algorithm. The up next algorithm is doing it over time. So it starts off good and then it goes really bad. I think it's an ideological subversion campaign. Like if anyone ever seen like Yuri Bezmenov and his speech about how the KGB was doing their operations, like this perfectly matches like an ideological subversion campaign in order to spiritually weaken the population so that it's easier to topple a government. So that's probably what's going on with that campaign.
Thank you.
Senators, any other questions? Thank you. I want to ask, follow up on one thing. Mr. Hartwell, you were talking about, you and Senator Parker had a discussion about when you have there was a policy and you would be instructed to make a diversion from that policy. I'm rephrasing slightly. Did you call that newsworthy exceptions, or am I talking about something else? Help us identify that process based on your experience there.
Yeah, that is the correct phrase, newsworthy exceptions. So, we had this very extensive policy that we were supposed to follow called implementation standards. But when we would deviate from that was when, only when Facebook told us to. So Facebook would tell us, the example I gave was Don Lemon at one point on live air said that white males are terror threats. And so if we look at the hate speech policy, I think section 1.3 at the time of that policy, of course, that would be a violation of hate speech because you're targeting a protected characteristic of PC, the whites, and you're calling them essentially labeling them terrorists. And so Facebook told us to allow that phrase. That specific instance of Don Lemon making that phrase, Facebook told us to ignore the hate speech policies in place and make a newsworthy exception.
Okay, that's what I was curious about. Thank you. And then, Mr. Snyder, I was going to ask you, based on the research you do across social media platforms, we've talked about Facebook and Google. Are there other social media platforms or entities like that you guys look at and have concerns about?
Yes, the two platforms we believe have the most far-reaching impact are Google and Amazon. We've not talked much about Amazon. Its impacts are how its work impacts other corporations. That might be a different topic than the election issue today. But Google and Facebook are the two organizations today that have the greatest impact on people's choices at the ballot box. Twitter, of course, is now notorious for what it did in the prior elections, but we've seen a marked change in the company's practices. But to this day, Elon Musk still says that he will limit the reach of posts that X does not prefer. So, while we've seen a great improvement at the company, we still do not believe that it properly protects free speech rights.
thank you each for your testimony. Thank you for being here and sharing your experience. It's very helpful to us, and people need to hear it.
I hope someone asks a question about foreign agents or stuff.
That's coming up on the next panel. We're going to talk a lot. We're going to listen a lot about that. Thank you. Thank you very much for your testimony. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
Okay, yes, looks like we are live. Okay, guys, what an amazing day this has been here. And I was able to watch the beginning of this thing, and I saw Zach's testimony. I saw all the testimonies. And I got to say, like, I am so touched to have somebody like Zach in our corner who took our fight to the Texas Senate, because, you know, all we do every day is present the news and present the facts and try to give the American people the information so that they can make informed decisions. And to be told that we have harmful content or hateful content, and to not, like, who's the victim? Who is getting hurt by the content we put out? I still don't know. But somebody does know. And for Zach to go and present this information to the Texas Senate with subpoena power, hopefully we can get some resolution here, and we can continue to bring you the news and information that you have been depending on for 10 years, 12 years. That's how long the Next News Network has been running. But as you heard, what did he say? He said that they're going to bankrupt us, and that was not a lie. That's where we stand right now. So, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I can't see your chat messages, but I can see that you're there. I see that you're watching. And flux capacitor is fluxing because we are making history every single day. We are just, each one of us, travelers through the timeline. And all we want to do is pick the right timeline and make everything right and fix the paradoxes. And today, it is my prayer that the work that Zach did today is going to fix that paradox. It's going to fix that error in the timeline, so we can get back to getting this country on track and making it great again. That's what it comes down to, my friends. Yes, the time circuits are on. We're not quite at 88 miles an hour. We're stuck in traffic. But the plutonium chamber is full. Man, what a day it's been. So anyway, I love you guys. We're gonna kill the stream now and say a prayer for us, say a prayer for Zach, say a prayer for this country, so we can get it back on track. I love you guys. Peace.